The book has been launched as ceremoniously as a ship is launched which goes out to the sea. And you have come of age of the book, and you all will have it in your hands. As the pensive look on the face of Mr. Gowda, his right hand extended over his head, which is typical of the man I have seen and known for many long years. I am delighted that he is with you all here this evening. I only wish my wife Betsy had been with me, since she too had a profound regard for Mr. Devegowda. In a century-long past, it was Oscar Wilde who, with his penchant for extravagant utterances, had said that every great man has his disciples, and that it is always Judas who writes the great man's biography. The allusion being to the disciple who betrayed Christ to the Roman soldiers who had come to arrest him. But the author of this book, Sugata, who is with you all, is happily no Judas, but he is no flatterer either. Except when he says in the very first page of his book that it has been written in celebration of what in Kannada is called Doda Jiva, a big life. But the big life, Doda Jiva, was simply not on Gowda's radar when he started out in his political career, nor even for many years thereafter. It was from very humble beginnings, and after many falls and starts, that Mr. Devegowda ultimately worked his way into state politics, being kept out in the wilderness for the first 10 years of his public life. Fortunately for him, things changed after that, when he got elected to the Karnataka State Assembly as an independent in the year 1962, and particularly when he moved a resolution in the Assembly a couple of years later, recommending to the then government of Karnataka to take all steps necessary to utilize to the fullest extent the potential resources of the waters of the Kaveri River and to implement the pending schemes within a fixed time frame. In his speech, he mentioned his great concern for the livelihood and subsistence of the people living in the districts of Hassan, of Kur, Mysore, Mandya, Tumkur, Chitradurga and Bangalore, stressing they were without sufficient water for drinking and for other needs. Fortunately for him, this plea struck a receptive chord. Senior leaders like Mr. Nijalangappa and Mr. Virendra Patil listened to him and gave him and the Assembly an assurance that they would focus on the Kaveri waters, draw up river projects very soon and implement them as well. And on this assurance, Mr. Devegowda withdrew his resolution. But since the assurance was not fulfilled, he again moved the same resolution a year or more later, insisting this time that it be passed unanimously, and his perseverance was rewarded. The then state government hurried things along, got foundation stones laid for the construction of reservoirs on the Harangi and Hemavati rivers, tributaries of the Kaveri. And soon, the Kaveri River, lifeline of the state of Karnataka, became Mr. Gowda's lifetime mission. It was also the cornerstone of his politics. It was Mr. Gowda's role in building a political movement around the river Kaveri that initiated a revival of the political dominance of the Vocaligas in the affairs of Karnataka. In Karnataka, as you know, although the Vocaligas and the Lingayats share political power in turns, with the chief ministership of the state going to one or other of these two rival groups, the Vocaligas had to wait patiently for their turn as the movers and shakers of power until Gowda became chief minister in December 1994. And it was in 1995 and thereafter that the litigation in the Kaveri water dispute between the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Kerala intensified. The long-drawn litigation having been closely monitored and supervised by the Chief Minister himself, but only till May 1996 at first, when he became Prime Minister, though even as Prime Minister, he never forsook or lost his interest in the waters of the Kaveri River. I can personally vouch for all this, since I was head of the Karnataka's legal team, a group that also included my distinguished colleagues at the bar, Sharad Javli, Mohan Kataki, Vijesh Kadapa, and Subhash Sharma. They deserve special mention, each and every one of them, because they were dedicated to the cause, devoting their time, their competence and their expertise to the manifold legal problems at hand, which were many. Though an engineer by training, Devegowda was always fascinated by and took an abiding interest in the law. In fact, it was Devegowda's senior friend, H.V. Sharda Prasad, information advisor to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, a man who also hailed from Gowda's hometown, Odena Rasipur in Assam district, who once said that Devegowda had a sound knowledge of agricultural laws, irrigation laws, civil engineering laws and regulations, and knew when to litigate and not to litigate. And on another occasion he also said that if Indira Gandhi, his boss, had displayed a better knowledge of law, and he meant constitutional law, she would not have imposed the internal emergency of June 1975. All this has been set out by Sugata in fluent prose in a chapter exclusively devoted to the Krishna and the Kaveri rivers. It has often been said that some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some, only a few, have greatness thrust upon them. Reading through the 500 odd pages of this readable book, it is clear it is a story of a man on whom greatness had been thrust, and this is how and why it occurred. In the general elections of May 1996, the Bharatiya Janata Party had secured the largest number of seats in the 11th Lok Sabha, but not large enough to form a government on its own. And its leader, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, was sworn in as Prime Minister of a coalition government on 16th May 1996. But not being able to prove that he had the confidence of the majority of the members of the Lok Sabha, Mr. Vajpayee was compelled to resign his high office only 13 days after assuming. Then a combined group of political parties were invited by President Shankar Sharma to form a government. The Congress party with the largest number of seats expressed Singh Surjit of the CPIM, who first approached Mr. V.P. Singh, leader of the Janata Dal party, and when he declined, he requested Jyoti Basu, Chief Minister of West Bengal, to head a coalition at the center. But the Politburo refused to permit Jyoti Basu to assume the mantle of Prime Minister, something that the late Mr. Basu deeply regretted for the rest of his eventful life. It was in these circumstances that Devegowda of the Janata Dal, then Chief Minister of Karnataka, was approached, and Sugata somewhat uncharitably describes him as the dark horse. Yes, it was this dark horse, this rank outsider of the Delhi Lutyens establishment, as Sugata also calls him, who got sworn in as India's 11th Prime Minister in June 1996, but alas, not for any length of time, because the Congress party supporting his government from the outside withdrew support in April 1997. It was said of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru that he had his imperfections, but he was a man bigger than the sum of his imperfections. A nice, well-rounded phrase. In the introduction to this book, its author says that Devegowda also had his imperfections, but Sugata is not averse to refer to and touch upon them. But then the author also says that Devegowda was much more than the sum of all perceptions and prejudices about him.
Yes.
Richly deserved, because between the acceptance of office as Prime Minister and his resignation 11 months later, Prime Minister Devegowda proved to his constituents and to the entire public at large that although his interlude in central politics was brief in time, it was noteworthy in performance. Just listen to this. 4 days after taking office as PM, he announced that Jammu and Kashmir would be given maximum autonomy. He fixed a date for his visit to the Kashmir Valley. And the weekly India Today, reporting his first visit, wrote, "The signs of hope are unmistakable. There was silent admiration in the war-weary valley after the visit of Prime Minister after 9 long years. Schools which had admitted children only after parents signed indemnity bonds are now taking them to Gulmarg and Pahalgam for weekend holiday camps." On his return from his first visit on Jammu and Kashmir, after meeting the leaders of various political parties and hearkening to what they told him about the severe distress in the local economy, Devegowda as Prime Minister promptly announced a decision with regard to outstanding loans taken by units and individuals to propagate, writing them off or rescheduling them with steep reduction in income, which raised considerable confidence. Besides, 2 major hydropower projects in the valley, which had till then remained dormant, were revived. And since there was no railway connection between the rest of India and the Kashmir Valley, Prime Minister Gowda initiated a plan to connect Baramulla and the Kashmir Valley to the rest of the country. A rail line between Jammu and Udhampur had been already conceived in 1983 under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, but Prime Minister Gowda expanded its scope. He then asked his railway minister to lay the foundation stone for the project, declaring it as a national project to be financed by the government of India outside the railway budget. Then, on his second visit to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, in August 1996, Devegowda also visited Leh, Kargil, Jammu and addressed a public meeting in Rajouri, where he created quite a stir. Because from the airport to the town where he was to address a public meeting, he informed the area commandant, General Dillon, who fortunately we see here tonight, that they should travel in an open jeep. The general, wary of a terrorist attack, however, politely demurred. But then Devegowda confidently told the general, "Oh, nothing will happen, don't worry. You drive and I will sit next to you. If somebody lobs a grenade, both of us will die." Poor consolation for the general, who with some trepidation reluctantly accompanied the Prime Minister in an open jeep. But sometime later, when Dillon recalled the open jeep ride, this is what the general said: "I was very frankly surprised. Prime Ministers don't generally do this. They want to be protected all the time." And he added as a compliment the following observation: "He," meaning Gowda, "was a brave chap. This valley would have changed if he had been around longer." 2 days after the second visit of the Prime Minister to Jammu and Kashmir in August 1996, the Election Commission announced that elections would be held in Jammu and Kashmir in September 1996. And it was Prime Minister Gowda's idea to make the process credible. In Delhi, he requested the ambassadors of a few countries to be observers and to dispatch independent reports to their respective countries and to international agencies. They agreed. He permitted international media to freely travel everywhere in Jammu and Kashmir, saying sometime later, I had nothing to hide, I had nothing to fear. After almost 7 years of separatist rebellion, at least 14,500 deaths and the destruction of a thriving tourism industry, Indian officials hoped election of a new state government would restore democracy and normalcy to the disputed state of Jammu and Kashmir. And it did. In the article in the Washington Post of 7 September, it was recorded, and I'll read it. Prime Minister Gowda's promises of maximum autonomy for Kashmir and an easing of tension between India and Pakistan have raised hopes of resolution of their territorial dispute, a dispute that has triggered 2 wars, unquote. The National Conference Party swept the polls, and Dr. Farooq Abdullah, who is here, and I welcome him, took office as Chief Minister on 9th October 1996 in the 8th Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly. It was under his watch that the democratic government came to power after 7 long years, and thereafter democratic governments continued in office, which regularly held elections to the state assembly, being held in the years 2002, again in the year 2008, and a third, and regrettably the last, in the year 2014. In March 2019, when a question arose about assembly polls to what would have been the 12th Legislative Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, senior politician Mr. Omar Abdullah reflected in a tweet that successive governments in Jammu and Kashmir since H.D. Devegowda have ensured that all attempts at disruption failed. Unknown to Omar Abdullah, then, the ultimate disruption came far too swiftly. In August 2000, when Jammu and Kashmir, a Part A state under the Constitution of India 1950, was reduced to a headless entity, the entire territory being orphaned and left without a legislative assembly. Jammu and Kashmir was cut down to size with the minuscule status of a union territory. In April 2019, a month before the suspension of Article 370, an article that had bestowed a special status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, Mr. Devegowda, then still a member of the 16th Lok Sabha, opposed the proposed diminution in status of Jammu and Kashmir in no uncertain terms. And the Hindu, in its issue of 2nd April 2019, carried a news item with the heading, Devegowda opposes attempt to scrap Article 370. So much for Jammu and Kashmir. With Devegowda as Prime Minister, an initiative was also taken regarding the northeastern states, thus far neglected. It began with a game-changing decision announced in October 1996 that each of the central ministries and departments should earmark 10% of the budget for spending in the northeast, and any amount unspent at the end of the year would not lapse but merge in a non-lapsed fund, which helped to create at the center a special department for the northeast, later enlarged to a Ministry of Development of the Northeast. During a visit to the northeast, Prime Minister implemented before the brief period of his term of office. His view was that the root cause of problems in the northeastern states was lack of political focus of the center on the remote regions of northeastern states. But he was the first Prime Minister of India who took care to look into and resolve the manifold problems of northeastern states. In February 1997, Prime Minister Gowda attended the World Economic Forum in Davos and hoping to resolve the Naga problem, he invited the General Secretary and Chairman of the NSCN, the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, to meet him at Davos. Instead, they met him in Zurich on his way to Davos. Later, it was that Principal Secretary Satish Chandra met General Secretary Mubia in May 1997, and it was ultimately Devegowda's successor, Mr. I.K. Gujral, who was able to make a statement in Parliament that an agreement was reached with the NSCN for a ceasefire for a limited period to engage in political discussions. The ceasefire has however continued for a long while in the Naga inhabited area. It hopefully continues to this day. So much for Mr. Gowda's brief but quite spectacular role as India's Prime Minister. I end on a strictly personal note. My wife Patsy and I had great affection and regard for Mr. Devegowda, having been in frequent contact with him, particularly when he was Chief Minister of Karnataka from December 1994 to 1996, and also when he was Prime Minister of India from 1996-1997. I was Chief Counsel for Karnataka in the Kaveri Interstate Water Disputes Tribunal, and much later also when its award was challenged in the Supreme Court. And during this period, Gowda was always available to us for advice. Most importantly, my wife and I found him to be a man who not only had a good head, he had a good heart as well. For instance, when an honest IAS officer, Mr. Vasudeva, was sent to prison for 1 month in 1995 for alleged contempt of court, wrongly in our view, by a bench of 2 judges of the Supreme Court, Gowda was not just enraged, he felt he must help this upright officer of the state. And he flew over to Delhi on 3 evenings in succession from Bangalore to consult with me as to why the President of India could not exercise his power of pardon under Article 73 of India's Constitution. Unfortunately, the Secretary to the President could not convince the President, and Vasudeva was made to suffer imprisonment for an entire month, which was a travesty of justice. But both my wife and I were most impressed with the concern of the Chief Minister of a state and of his overriding sense of fairness and justice. Besides all this, ladies and gentlemen, this 500-page book will be of great interest to those interested in the ups and downs of politics. Because of the political life of Devegowda, the author says, it has been a mixed bag of victories and defeats, of adulations and of humiliations. But most importantly, his image as a politician, and more importantly, his image as a statesman and as a human being, has come out of all this scathed and untarnished. May God bless him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nariman, for those priceless words. Can I now request Dr. Farooq Abdullah to share with us a few words in his characteristic wit and wisdom. Dr. Abdullah, will you come to the podium, please?
हजारों साल नरगिस अपनी बेनूर की रोती है, बड़ी मुश्किल से चमन में ईदवर पैदा होता है। ईदवर आपके सामने हनुमान जी ने आपको he has told you everything. Now I want to just add a few words. I remember meeting him as Prime Minister of India. His one Prime Minister in the most difficult times came 4 times to the state. It was difficult for anyone to walk around. The situation was so bad. But he came. And I remember, then also I met as GOC Kashmir. Very difficult times. 4 of the foreigners were abducted. And he was the one who was given the control of trying to recover them. I met him in his house about it. Unfortunately, with our state, there are so many players around. And thus, he also faced the same players, who instead of following his advice, had they done so, I'm sure those 4 people would have been alive. And Sab, I owe you a gratitude that how well you tried to manage that state in a most difficult time. Well, when Devegowda came, and he met us all, he said, I want to make a new beginning. Let's find a way forward. We said, we're ready for a way forward. We'll be with you. You start. Said, will you take part in the election? I said, our demand has been for a long time for our autonomy. Narasimha Ji Rao promised us in the parliament, sky is the limit. I don't think we ever saw that sky. We only see the bottom. Well, that's another story. He came. He said, I'll do everything in my power. Will you fight? Yes, we'll fight. Whether it kills us, we'll go to the people. But you start at the beginning. So we started on a mission that was dear to him and his heart. To bring people nearer, not to push people to the wall. And I'm grateful to you, sir. Until I live and my brain functions, we'll all be grateful to you. The Kashmir is becoming. We started the process. Very difficult. I tell you, when I went to Handwara, where the people were so frightened, scared, and I walked in that street, and none of them would move from their shop. So with great difficulty, I walked into one of the shops. I said, why are you afraid? They said, in the day, army controls here. In the night, it is the militants who we have to face. So to save our lives, but we'll vote for you. I said, that's enough. When I came to see him after the election, he said his report is that you'll probably get 25 seats. I said, maybe you've got more information than I have. I went to England to see my wife and children who were studying there. And when I returned, as the results were coming, I landed at Palam Airport. And my daughter, Safia, came and saw me. She said, Dad, you're going to win 25 seats. I said, yes, that's what the Prime Minister said. I sat down. She said, Dad, you're leading in 35 seats. And she went on, Dad, you're leading in 50 seats. And I said, God Almighty, I couldn't believe it. Now, whoever voted for peace and prosperity, for remaining with India. Not an easy job. I said, Peggy, don't tell me anymore. My heart will not be able to bear it. I came back to the house here, they had given me And in the night I couldn't sleep, so I walked out and the soldier guarding said to me, "Why are you not sleeping?" I said, "I'm afraid that God has given us such majority. Will I be able to fill people's desires? Will I be able to do something good? Will I be able to make India stronger in this state? May God help me." He said, "Go and sleep. He has given you the power. He will guide you." That was an ordinary soldier. He helped me in every way he could. We had to inaugurate Woodley Hydel project, 300 megawatt project. The Prime Minister had to inaugurate it. And as you know, SPG, they're scared of everything. And they thought the Prime Minister's life is at stake because it's not near the border. His minister rang me that the Prime Minister cannot come because SPG is saying. I said, then you're giving this to our neighbors that Kashmir is not part of India. You're scared. And I have no right to be the Chief Minister of this state if the Prime Minister of India is afraid to come. He spoke to me at 12 o'clock in the night and said, "I'm going to come. Whether my life goes or not, it is part of India, and I will come." He arrived. He went, inaugurated the power project, and then went on to address the people of Uri, just near the border, General knows, and spoke, because he could only speak English, of his language, mother tongue. But there was a minister who was fluent in Urdu. He translated. The crowd was elated. The Prime Minister of India in these most difficult times has arrived. From there, we went to Rajouri. Like the general drove him, I also drove him in an open jeep in Rajouri, very close to border. You can understand how SPG was shivering in their pants. But I drove him. Went to the meeting, a huge meeting. He assured them that India will look after them. Their problems will be solved. Be assured. Tragedy, he didn't last long for Prime Ministership. That was not his mistake. That was a mistake of somebody else. And I told him, I said, you are ruling on the soldiers of Congress, and you are trying to make charges against the President of Congress. See that, what was his name, the Prime Minister who was at that time? They put a case against him. And Sadarji was I think the chief of that organization. And I met him in a party, and I said, what the hell are you doing? The very party you stand on. You're trying to put the president of that party on false grounds into the situation where it's endangering his seat. That was the type of people we have in us. That's a tragedy. Coaches sometimes make such difficult things for the man who leads. For God's sake, get rid of the coaches and listen to people who tell you honestly what is there, whether you like it or not. This is what India needs. India needs bold Prime Minister, but Prime Minister who can hold everybody together. Not divide for the sake of politics, but hold India as a whole, whether you're Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, anything. That's what India needs. India doesn't need divisions. Tragedy is every election has divided India and Indian people. When will that day come? When no longer will be divided because of religion. I'm a Muslim, but I respect Hindu and Sikhs and Christians as much as I respect my own religion. What is wrong with it? Whether I pray to the north and you pray to the east or you pray to the west, how does it matter? Power is only him. He In what light you see him is up to you. But look at the divisions that are made today. How we are being segregated into small corners. And then we want to make a strong India. India will never be strong unless the people of India are strong. Never. That is the message. That this man, this great man, risen from the ground, he didn't descend from the top. He ascended from the ground. Realized the hopes and aspirations of the people. Whether you are a farmer, whether you are industrialist, whether you are any ordinary man, he knew it is you that makes India. And he tried to do it. I hope people respect that part of it. I wanted to read how human he was. If that book can be passed to you, please, I will take it. I'll just read a small passage. It touched me greatly. I hope it touches you as greatly as it touched me. आजकल ये मास्क भी ऐसी मुसीबत आ गई है, नहीं जाने कि किस को ले जाए। The farewell. Returning to the discussion on the PMO, Satish Chandra, who had contributed immensely to Gowda's prime ministership and with whom Gowda had assumed a kinship, moved out as principal secretary immediately after Gowda stepped down. The Gujarat government made him the governor of Goa. He was in office for a very short period. As soon as Vajpayee took over as prime minister, he had to resign, true to himself. The rest of his years were passed outside of public prayer, which he never sought in the first place throughout his long and distinguished career. Chandran passed away in the early hours of 12 September 2009 in his Bangalore home. The family planned for a quiet cremation as per his wishes. But the word got round and it reached Gowda. An officer informed him over the phone. He started out immediately as soon as he reached Chandran's home. He took over the funeral arrangements. He told Chandran's wife and two sons that he had lost an elder brother and could not allow an uneventful cremation at an elected crematorium. He ensured Chandran arranged firewood for the fire and lent his shoulders to the bier. Tears were rolling down his cheeks. As a human being, it was top bureaucrats like G.C. were witnessing reports. No one else would have done something like that, and he would have done it for no one else. Shows the man how close he has been. Many may not have seen him, but in their hearts they have his memory, and they will continue to have that. May God give you long life. May you see the glory of this nation. May this dark clouds pass away, and we see a flourishing India, an India for all, not for just one. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for your impassioned speech and your deeply emotional words that have touched a chord in every heart today. Thank you so much. And before I request Sri Achuri and Sri Jairam Ramesh to share their observations about the book, can I request the author of Subrata Srinivasa Raju to read some excerpts from the book?
I won't take long, and I will not read excerpts. I just will make a small little speech. I feel so overwhelmed today that I could get into the record books with the longest vote of thanks ever proposed. But I won't venture to do so, and try your patience. A well-crafted image in a Kannada poem says that if one looks back, life is a mine filled with gemstones of indebtedness. On this occasion, I am filled with nothing but indebtedness. I thank you all for coming here this evening and engaging with the many diverse strands of ideas woven into this book. This book, in my mind, is a metaphor that anxiously endeavors to capture a few things. I say anxious because one really does not know to what extent one has been successful. The furrows have made clear patterns across the field. The seeds have been sown, and I can now only pray for a bountiful rain of blessings and a decent harvest. My state now is very much like an Indian farmer's uncertain destiny. When I started working on this book in early 2019, people scoffed at me. They asked, does Mr. Gowda deserve a penguin biography? What has he really done? Is there enough to fill up the pages? Now, at the end of 2021, when they hold a 600-page book, they say, this is a rehabilitation of his legacy. I'm glad that they now realize that he has a legacy, but I've had to often correct them by saying that this book project is not about rehabilitating anybody, but about restoring the balance. Post-independent Indian history has been partial to some and cruel to many. It has celebrated a chosen few, but ignored numerous stars. For me, studying Mr. Devegowda's life, politics, and times has not only been about restoring the balance, but has been about tracking our own perceptions, prejudices, and misjudgments. It has been about exploring the diverse democratic traditions of India and its vibrant federal character. It was about situating a person who had made it to the pinnacle of power without pelf, patronage, or pedigree. It was about celebrating the underrated triumph of Indian democracy. Why was Devegowda ignored? The answers became obvious as I began to do my research. He came from the bottom of the Varna hierarchy. He was a Shudra, and even among Okkalikas, he did not belong to the educated and landed elite. He did not come from a family that wore a zari brocaded silk turban, which indicated one's superior station in life. His parents were unlettered, without a dream, on a small, ragged patch of land in the boring plains of Hassan. Mr. Devegowda neither had real capital, nor did he inherit socio-cultural capital of his upper caste peers. He was the ultimate outsider to every pattern and structure that existed in politics in India until he became Prime Minister. Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Narendra Modi, who succeeded him, had similar backgrounds, but Dr. Singh had received the finest education abroad and was basically a technocrat, not a mass leader. Mr. Modi was propelled by the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Dr. Singh never won a popular election, and Mr. Modi had never contested a popular election until he became the Chief Minister of Gujarat. That was not the case with Mr. Gowda. Right from 1954, he was in the midst of people, contesting elections, working on big ideas, battling out, being defeated, being humiliated, winning both Pyrrhic and real victories, becoming a patriarch, and constantly learning to view the world through a grain of sand. Mr. Gowda's democratic engagement was stellar and deep. This should have been celebrated in our democracy, but we did not seem to care. And our moment of introspection stares us now in 2021, when the din of our democracy being threatened has reached a crescendo. We sometimes ignore certain people, certain moments and contexts in history at our own peril. I will not read an excerpt from the book before I conclude, as it is traditionally done. You will anyway read the book, but I quote a lovely passage from Jonathan Swift's A Voyage to Brottingham in Gulliver's Travels, an 18th century book. This passage has held in it the essence of what I saw in Mr. Devegowda as a biographer. I quote, "For I remember well, in a discourse one day with the king, when I happened to say there were several thousand books among us written upon the art of government, it gave him, directly contrary to my intention, a very mean opinion of our understandings. He professed both to abominate and despise all mystery, refinement, and intrigue, either in a prince or a minister. He could not tell what I meant by secrets of state when an enemy or some rival nation were not in the case. He confined the knowledge of governing within very narrow bounds, to common sense and reason, to justice and lenity, to the speedy determination of civil and criminal causes, with some other obvious topics which are not worth considering. And he gave it for his opinion that whoever could make 2 ears of corn or 2 blades of grass to grow upon a spot of ground where only one grew before would deserve better of mankind and do more essential service to his country than the whole race of politicians put together." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sugata. You have indeed resurrected a forgotten gem, especially with your brilliant allegory to Jonathan Swift. Thank you very much. I now request Sri Sitaram Yechuri to share his thoughts on the book.
Dr. Farooq, my friend Jairam Ramesh, Sugata, the author, Sugata Srinath Raju, the organizers of today's book launch, and my dear friend. After a very elaborate précis presented by my senior colleague in the Rajya Sabha, Fali Nariman, and the emotional speech of Farooq Saab, and justifiably emotional speech of Farooq Saab, because what happened at that time was something was history in making. There's very little to add except recount the fact that Sugata has actually brought back into life the events that happened 25 years ago. And these are important to understand today, because when we went through that period, Mr. P. Chidambaram was here, we were all at that point of time going through the uncertainties with a sort of a passion saying that we have to preserve India. What was this passion all about? In a democracy, if you have elections and somebody gets enough number of seats to form the government, yes, they form the government. But if you don't, the others everybody will try to make sure they form a government. But form a government for what? And that is what has happened. The United Front did not exist before the elections. The United Front came into existence after the elections. when there was no single party that got a majority. And the BJP, having been the single largest party, was making a bid to ensure they got a majority. And that is when the United Front was formed, saying that no, that has to be prevented. Because the stock that they come from, that India in which we were born, that India which we cherish, that India which stands on the fundamental foundations of our constitution, that India will be threatened. And therefore that must be prevented. And I remember those days in those TV studios, when everybody coming and charging us at the left, saying, why are you preventing us from forming the government? I said, nobody can prevent anybody from forming the government. If you have the numbers, please form the government. And I remember Mr. Chidambaram getting very worried when Mr. Shankar Dayal Sharma, the then president, invited Mr. Vajpayee as the head of the largest party. And Mr. Sugata recounts every inch of those discussions in the Rashtrapati Bhavan with the then president. And then when that government was formed, I was talking to Mr. Chidambaram saying that now this is a crucial time because I don't know how many people will live. Looking back 25 years ago, today when we see the political culture in our country, who is in which party yesterday, who is there today, where we will go tomorrow. I mean, this time in this period looks so surreal, it looks unreal. But that is what India needs and that is what India is all about and that is what the United Front government brought about. Yes, Mr. Nariman talked about my party's Politburo and Central Committee decision and Jyoti Basu and that's all now part of history. But I remember when it was decided that Mr. Devegowda should be the candidate of the United Front, then he had just not even completed 3 years of his chief ministership. And I recollect he telling Jyoti Basu when Jyoti Basu said that you must take over to do this job. He said, sir, I want to be like you, like the longest serving chief minister in India, and not come here as a prime minister. I won't be allowed to last long because of the Congress support. And therefore, once I go back as a prime minister, having not been serving my full term as prime minister, even, whatever be the circumstances, I cannot go back and become chief minister again. That only happened once in independent India when Sri Rajagopalachari, Jawaharlal Nehru, to bring back from the Governor Generalship of India to become the chief minister of the Madras presidency. But that is very unlikely. So you are cutting short my chief minister's day. Then I recollect both of them discussing, Jyoti Basu and Comrade Sujit was also there, discussing, saying that we need to keep India together. We need to save India together. Save India and its constitutional order. That requires that you will have to discharge this responsibility. 25 years ago, and today if you look at it, that value, that milieu, that politics is something completely, we travel so far away, or in fact regress so far away, that all this today appears as something that was not possible to happen in India. And it was this passion. When Farooq Saab talks about the Jammu and Kashmir, General Dhillon is here, and the Puri meeting, open jeep, even he in Delhi were costing Mr. Gowda. He went not once, not twice, but 4 times to J&K. 4 times to J&K. Subsequently, after many years, when we went to J&K under respective home ministers, we could see how the situation deteriorated from where it actually leaped at that point of time, from the sort of tension-ridden and uncertain completely, and in a situation that was that everybody thought was just not controllable. And I think that was the period, if I'm right, General Dhillon, when the unified command came into existence in Kashmir. And that's the first time that this unified command, the concept was even thought about. And that was the time when the United Front decided that it has to be economic development and empowerment of people of Jammu and Kashmir. The railway line was laid for the first time, and the projects were inaugurated, employment opportunities were created. That gave confidence to the Kashmiri youth, which stood good for the country for more than a decade after that. Similarly with the Northeast. I mean, we've had prime ministers who do a lonely march on a bridge whose foundation was laid by the Devegowda in Guwahati. And when we have, and that was completed, as it happens with these projects, somebody started, when it's completed, somebody else is in position in office. But not giving credit to that somebody who started it, that is unfortunate, and that is what politics has been actually degenerated to. I don't think Mr. Gowda was even invited for that inauguration of the Guwahati Bridge. I'm not sure. But going back to that time, we started the donor, that is the 10% which Fali Nariman ji was mentioning about. These 10% of all development budgetary allocations to the Northeast. The Naga peace accord, at that point in time, the ceasefire, not really the peace accord, the ceasefire was for the first time. I think Devegowda Sahib was the first Prime Minister to actually have met the underground insurgent leaders of the Nagaland movement and then brought them back into mainstream Indian politics. So why was Jammu and Kashmir Northeast chosen for special attention? And that was the focus of the Common Minimum Program. The two of those who participated in preparing that year, Mr. Chidambaram and me. The third, Mr. Jaipal Reddy, unfortunately, has left us. And the focus was in integrating India. It was 3 years, less than 3 years after the Babri Masjid was demolished. A little over 3 years. And there was total uncertainty in lack of social cohesion and unity in the country, and that was growing. To bring back the concept of India, a united, inclusive, secular, democratic India from the foundations of this constitution, it was necessary, as Farooq Sahib said, to get all Indians together. And it was that led to the focus on the Jammu and Kashmir, on Northeast, those were the troubled areas at that time, to bring them back together. And this is what I think today, when we recollect that period, is what that we need to underline and to restore as a part of your political thinking and political functioning and the activities of political parties, that it is this India, based on this constitution, that has to be safeguarded and studied. And that has to be through a combination of both the political initiatives to resolve troubled and long-standing disputes, as well as for the economic empowerment of the common India. And that is where, before the Common Minimum Program actually was adopted by the United Front, again, as I said, United Front was formed after the elections. Common Minimum Program was formulated after the government was formed. And that became the basis for the government to function. And you'll read in this book a very rich section on how officers were chosen by Mr. Devegowda. And a very senior, very old IAS officer, very high reputation from Andhra Pradesh, the state I come from, Mr. Yugandhar, whom he summoned him back after retirement, brought him back here and put him in charge of program implementation. And with every section of the Common Minimum Program, he would draw a plan on how to implement it. And that was based on what Gowda Sahib's PMO had created and called Basic Minimum Services. The program called Basic Minimum Services that the government will have to deliver. So this, I'm recollecting all this more out of experience than out of, going through the book of whole, and not going through sequentially through the book, more out of experience in relation to what is happening today in our country. So it is not to today rehabilitating Mr. Gowda. What Sugato, this book should contribute to is actually rehabilitating India. And that is where we all have to work together. And that, I think, is not really a question. And Devegowda sir will be the first one to agree with me, because they will also, I must say, agree with me. It's not individuals that matter, but what matters is our society and the larger interest. Because there were also some disputes. Finally, I promise not to speak long, so I just end with giving this small incident that occurred. Early in Mr. Devegowda's Prime Minister tenure, I think there was a trip he went to Italy, and one of leading political, not political, but a leading journalist, commentator, TV anchor, and a very, it was the one who was doing admirable work even today, Mr. Karnataka, was running a show in which he interviewed me. And he asked me this very mischievous question, saying, what do you think of the Prime Minister carrying a large personal entourage with him on a foreign tour? So my answer to him was that why the Prime Minister, any official who carries a personal entourage is not something in order. So that is not in order. But anyway, I don't know the details of what you're asking. The next day, Times of India, when the question of media, the corporate media being manipulated, came up with a front page headline saying that the left criticizes Prime Minister Gowda for carrying an entourage. I was not even aware of what the entourage was, what was the family was. And then Mr. Sujit the next morning came, summoned me to his room and gave me a total solid hiding, saying that, this government we are supporting. We are also instrumental in forming the United Front government. Devegowda sir was our proposal. All of us jointly, why are you saying this? I said, comrade, I never said all these things. This is what the media said. So those days, technology was not as advanced as today. So it was all recorded on VHS tapes. So when you get a VHS tape converted to a normal VHS, you could see it home, even in a video player. So it was converted, and I didn't have a video player, but even in the one you had to see it converted back into a video, and then I had to see it, and they said it was all transcribed and then shown to both. So who took it to the Devegowda sir? And then they realized that all this was part of the media, creation. Today, of course, there is no need to say anything about media creation, because everything is media creation. What we have to know, what is reality, is something you will have to see through a big, what do you call that, something that enlarges the text of the word. Otherwise, you can't find the truth, you can't find the reality. So in this situation, I think what a regression India has had. So I would like to thank Sugato for this book in order to take us back to some fundamentals that are required to be asserted today. And for actually pointing out one fact which we were not conscious that none of us in the left, I'm sure, neither Jyoti Basu nor Sujit nor myself, three of us used to attend the steering committee meetings, were conscious of the caste character of Mr. Gowda. But Sugato brought out that Pratibul equation about a Shudra Prime Minister and a Dalit President. And in a sense, it was the left that proposed the Dalit president as a vice president to begin with, Mr. Narasimha to begin with, and of course Mr. Gowda, whom we had discussed and supported. So I can only say one thing, that Gowda Sahib started his political work the year I was born. So I always said, sir, I only have to learn from you, and to be fair, he's treated me with great degree of affection and a great degree of fondness, which continues even today. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the author and the organizers for having organized this launch function. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri Jyoti. for your wonderful thoughts that you shared with us today. Can I now invite Sri Jairam Ramesh to share his observations on this epic biography.
बहु सम्मानित बहु गौरवान्वित देवेगौड़ा ಅವರೇ, Dr. Farooq Abdullah, Sitaram Yechuri, Mr. Kumaraswamy, Mr. Revanna, who is not here, members of the Devegowda family, the author, Sugata, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me congratulate Sugata for producing not just an admiring biography, but an admirable biography of a political personality who is still with us. It's very difficult to write political biographies, but to write political biography of a person who is still with us is even more difficult. What makes the task of Sugata even more difficult than writing about a living political figure is to write about somebody who, to use the language of our Prime Minister in some other context, is a politics GV. Devegowda ji is the original politics GV. He was Chief Minister for less than 2 years. He was Prime Minister for less than 1 year. But his engagement with democratic politics has been for 60 years. That is Sugata should be congratulated for focusing not just on that aspect of Devegowda ji's career, which spanned his chief ministership and prime ministership, which were not inconsequential, but in my view, focusing on Devegowda ji, the person, the political figure, the political fighter, both in and out of power, in the state and at the center. So I think that's a very difficult task to do, and I wish to congratulate Sugata on this. Writing political biographies is very difficult, particularly in India. Because if you read political biographies in India, they are basically, to use the language of Sanskrit, they are either prashastis or they are charitas. So this could have been a Gauda prashasti. This could have been a Gauda charita. In the long tradition of charitas, going back to Bana's Harsha Charita of the 7th century. There have been very few biographers who have actually written biographies in the true sense of the term. Of course, the gold standard of political biography in India is Sarvepalli Gopal. His 3 volumes of Jawaharlal Nehru and his 1 volume on his father, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, must stand out as the quintessential example of what a political biography must be. Rajmohan Gandhi has produced 3 superlative and outstanding biographies of Gandhi, of Patel, and of Rajaji. Ram Guha has produced 2 biographies of Gandhi. Gandhi before India and India after Gandhi. But as Sugata mentioned in his brief remarks, these biographies are of national figures. These biographies are of international figures. And biographies of people who have made their careers in state-level politics are few and far between, particularly in the English language. You won't find many biographies of Kamaraj, for example, in the English language. You will not find any biography of Y.B. Chauhan in the English language. You will not find a biography of Hari Krishna Mehta, or even Govind Vallabh Pant for that matter, in the English language. So I think what Sugata has done is truly remarkable. He's produced a biography of a person whose engagement with politics was at the state level, and destiny gave him a national footprint. He was not a national leader, unlike Rajaji or Gandhi or Nehru or Patel, or on whom biographies have been written. He was a figure who animated and lived and breathed Karnataka politics, but circumstances gave him a national role, not just in 1996, but in the late 70s, which is a period that is forgotten and which Sugata revives very well when Mr. Devegowda became very close to Morarji Desai and played a very important role in the affairs of the Janata Party in the 70s and 80s. So I don't wish to speak much about the subject of the biography. Others have spoken, but I do wish to say that Sugata has produced, in my view, a first-rate biography. He sets the context of Karnataka politics, and after James Maynard, I can't think of any book that I have read which looks at the politics of the state in such a manner, detailed manner, that Sugata has done. So the context is very deep, the text is very readable, it's a very readable, engaging biography. He has relied, unlike Gopal, unlike Rajaji, unlike Ram Guha, he has relied much on oral history. And that's natural, because the generation of Indian politicians who have written sources, who have written archives, is not very great. And Mr. Devegowda has preserved his letters, preserved some of his correspondence which Sugata has used. But by and large, his biography is not based on contemporary written evidence that has been unearthed, but it's based on rich oral history with people who have been engaged with Mr. Devegowda at the state level and at the national level. So I don't want to knock this achievement, but I do wish to point out that one of the great challenges facing any political biographer in India is the absence of contemporary written material. There is a surplus of contemporary oral material, because ours is an oral culture, ours is not a written culture. And that generation of politicians who wrote and wrote and wrote is gone. So, for example, there's a biography of Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, which is based entirely on recollections and interviews, but nothing on the written material, unlike biographies of other political leaders of that generation. But I congratulate Sugata for persuading Devegowda ji to give up some of his material, and he's used some really new material which sheds new light on the political events both in the state as well as in the center. Finally, biographies are of two kinds. Biographies are judgmental mostly, because biographers set out to write biographies of people they admire or they hate. If you want to bring down somebody, you write a biography and demonize him or her. If you want to express your admiration for somebody, you write a biography in praise of him or her. So most biographies are judgmental. But I would categorize this biography as a narrative biography. Not so much a judgmental biography as much as, his admiration for Mr. Devegowda is obvious, but that does not prevent him from narrating events that do not necessarily put Mr. Devegowda in good light. So it's a narrative biography, it's not a judgmental biography. And I think that's one great achievement that the book has accomplished. So I think Sugata today has shown how biographies of living personalities can be written, how biographies based on oral history and some contemporary written material can be written. He's also demonstrated how to situate the life of an individual in the larger political and social context in which the individual operates. I think Mr. Devegowda deserved a biography, and in Sugata he has found a worthy biographer. So a worthy politician has found a worthy biographer. I told Sugata before coming here that I'm coming here not as a member of the Indian National Congress, I'm coming here as an author and a political biographer. And I come here out of respect for Mr. Devegowda ji, of course, but as somebody who's read every word of this book, enjoyed it immensely. A few comments which I will communicate with the author, but I look forward to more such biographies of leaders who have transformed their states and who also had a national imprint. And they are what James Maynard called many years ago, Sugata may remember, he called regional progressives. And one of the great contributions in this book is not only does he bring out Mr. Devegowda's career, but he also brings out Mr. Devraj Ursa's contributions to the making of modern Karnataka. And here is another individual whose biography you can't find in English, but yet throughout the 70s, Mr. Devraj Urs was the central figure in Karnataka politics, and of course the leader of the opposition was Mr. Devegowda. So thank you, Sugata, and look forward to more such books from you.
Thank you, Shri Jairam Ramesh, for your insightful observations and your highlighting the distinction between biographies, biographers, and hagiographies. Thank you, gentlemen, for all your erudite words. Will Upasana please escort all the speakers to their seats, and we can move on to the next part of our program. Shri Sitaram Churi, Shri Jairam Ramesh, and Dr. Farooq Abdullah, please come and take your seats. Thank you.